Hi, I'm John, founder and CEO of John Marshall Media. Today we're talking about authors reading their own books. The first question is, should the author read their own audiobook? Well, the answer is absolutely yes and maybe no. It just depends. The general rule of thumb is that nonfiction books are almost always best read by the author. Certainly seems that listeners generally tend to prefer it. The idea, I think, is that if it's a business book or a self-help, it comes from the mind of the author, and therefore it gives it a certain validation, coming from the person that wrote it. If it's an autobiography or something more personal, maybe a history of a family member, or just a history book that the author wrote, there's just a certain legitimacy that is brought to the author's voice reading it. Now, typically nonfiction books are best not read by the author unless the author's a really good actor. You could be, but generally fiction books, there's a lot more just acting going on in them. And a really good narrator usually has a very strong acting background. Or maybe they're just blessed with being a good actor. They've studied acting, they've spent a lot of time in their craft to become a great narrator. And usually hiring someone like that to read a fiction book really pays off. So again, the general rule of thumb is that if it's a nonfiction, then usually yes, we'd like to have the author read it. Fiction, let's leave it to the professional narrators unless you're just a really good actor, and I've seen it happen. When we recorded Neil Gaiman's American Gods here, I mean, everything that comes out of Neil Gaiman's mouth is incredible. So there is that. He is great. He was great at doing that book. But a lot of times we've had authors do fiction books, and I'd wish that they hadn't. So now you've decided you want to read your book. Let's make sure that we can make it the best that it can be. First off, how do we make your performance great? The main thing about making a performance great, and this is true for for authors reading their own books or for a narrator, is its passion. It's all about the passion, about the commitment to the text, to really feeling what it is that you're writing and delivering it in that way. One of the great examples that I love to use of just passion and commitment is Tom Cruise. He's one of my favorite actors. And one of the things he does so well is everything that he does, he absolutely pours his whole heart into it. So passionate. He also does something very technical that I think works very well. He tends to slow things down a lot. Right? Just like that. What's his famous one in Jerry Maguire in the locker room? Help me, help you. Help me, help you. And I thought that was always such a great acting demonstration about absolute frustration, passion. He wants to help Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character so much. And just that slowness gives him all the time in the world to pour so much passion and importance into every one of his words. So that's really something I tell all of the narrators that we hire and the authors that we work with, is just be passionate about it and just believe in it. And by doing that, it's going to be engaging. Passion is engaging. Whereas the opposite is obviously not engaging, like the boring, monotone thing. Nobody wants to listen to that, right? So in this case, definitely the opposite is true. The more passion, the more commitment you can bring to your book, the more you can believe in it, the better. Now let's talk about some technical things with reading your audiobook. First off, you've got to have a very quiet recording studio. Our studios here in New York are all prefabricated isolation booths. They are what they call floated off the ground. They rest on springs and neoprene pucks. That isolates it from the room around it. It's a room within a room. So we have the quiet recording studios, and then we have the booths inside of that. So it's an extremely quiet situation. We really need quiet situations because we just don't want anything distracting going on. One of my favorite examples, we recently had a book delivered to us from a home studio narrator that had a cat meowing in the background. Now, clearly, our goal in making a great audiobook is to make it engaging for the listener. So I don't know how engaging it's going to be when we're listening to the book and all of a sudden you randomly hear a cat meowing in the background. So avoiding any background noise is ridiculously important. The extraneous cat meows, lawnmowers, traffic sounds, sirens, all of those sorts of things make it extremely challenging. So quiet is really king. One of the issues with quiet is that then we need some good ventilation, right? And ventilation is always noisy. So that really works against it. So that's, in a professional recording studio like ours, that's something we've focused on immensely, is getting very, very quiet ventilation into the studios. It's not an easy thing to do. It means that you have to build a lot of turns into the ducts. And the ducts need to have lining inside them. I know we had a customer, Mango Languages, who I dearly love, and they started out their company by recording everything themselves. And they had done it in I think in a closet. And they talked about how they would record it for like a half hour at a time, and they would open the door, and the heat would just pour out, and they would breathe and take a little break and then go back in. And some people have booths set up like that, maybe in a closet, because it's an isolated room. Usually there's no windows, and so that can work very well. Another great thing about a closet is it's a very dead recording environment. We say dead by not having a reverb or echo in it, right? There's not a sound bouncing around. It's like a dead, very present sound. So when the listener is listening to the book, all they really hear is the direct sound of the voice. They don't hear any reverb of the sound bouncing off walls or any background noise. A closet can be a great place for that because you've got a lot of clothes hanging up. Clothes suck up a lot of sound that would bounce off the walls, and sound bouncing off the walls creates reverb. That's why when you go in the shower, people like to sing in the shower because it's got a lot of reverb, right? Because there's a lot of hard tile surfaces, and especially if you really want to make it sound awesome, take all the towels and the robes out of your bathroom. That'll make it really, really reverberant, and it makes it a lot more fun to sing. But for audiobooks, that would be the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish. So again, it's very important to have a very quiet and a very dead room. Most recording studios are designed to record music. So if you just were to, call up a studio and book yourself in there to read a book, it's unlikely that the room would be set up properly for that. It would probably be quite loud, in that there would be a lot of extraneous noise relative to what we're used to. Because when you're recording a guitar or a drum set, the noise floor, we say the noise floor is like the ambient sound around it. The noise floor does not need to be very low. It does not have to be very quiet in order to record a guitar effectively, or certainly not a drum set. But to record the human voice, every little sound is going to leak into it. You may be aware, kind of ironically, I'm not recording this in one of our recording studios here. Fortunately, they're all booked up today. I'm recording it in my office, which faces right onto 9th Avenue and 44th Street, and occasionally you'll hear some sirens, perhaps. It is New York City. And you'll also hear the air conditioner clicking off and on. Perhaps you'll hear a fair bit of reverberation. This would not be a very good audiobook recording, so we can use this as an example of what not to do. So if you're going to record in a recording studio that is not designed specifically as an audiobook or a voice recording room, preparations will need to be made in order to make it a more dead recording environment. A lot of studios have blankets that you can hang up, or you can just bring blankets from home, and I've done that in situations where I've had to record people in makeshift environments, and it works very well as long as the room is quiet. But that certainly can solve the deadness problem. So we will need you quite close to the microphone in order to get that deadness right. So what I usually say is we want to have like a hang loose hands for I know back in the 80s and 90s and from Hawaii, the catchphrase was "hang loose, dude." So that's kind of one of the things I say is that we go right between, say about from there is about how far away you'd like that microphone. Keep it nice and close, and then we want to put up some blankets around the recording area so that it creates a nice dead area. And that also will do a little bit to make a room that is not so quiet a little more quiet. Continuing on our technical notes, One thing you need to do is to make sure not to wear a stiff shirt. Like the shirt that I'm wearing would not be very good for recording an audiobook. You should be wearing a cotton, usually like a t-shirt, a short sleeve t-shirt usually works wonderfully. Nothing stiff or starchy. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's just me moving my arms back and forth. And if you gesticulate at all when you're reading, then you're going to have that kind of movement. And if you wear a nice cotton shirt, then that will stop any kind of movement like that. It's also very important to stay hydrated. When you're reading out loud for a long time, and it does take a long time, you're moving a lot of air and moisture out of your mouth. You're expelling a lot of water. So you need to drink a lot of water, because when you get dry, your mouth will get very clicky. These little clicks and pops that'll happen just from your tongue moving, your mouth opening and closing. It can end up being very loud, very distracting, and kind of gross, and it can sort of feel like you're living inside the narrator's mouth. For that reason, it's also really good to have lip balm, because again, you might get a little more dehydrated, and then your lips, when they're dry, as everybody knows, they'll stick together more, and so when they unstick, they'll make pops, and also just cause you to make slight little pronunciation mistakes and just be annoying and distracting. So you'll, on that note, want to have a lot of water. Drink a lot of water. Always have a pitcher of water right next to you and drink it, a lot. You'll be going to the bathroom a lot, and that's okay too. But it's really important because it can be really gross and distracting to have all those mouth clicks in there. Now, I said you're going to be sitting there for a while, right? Recording an audiobook takes a fair bit of time. Now, our professional narrators that we use almost all the time record in what we call a ratio of 2-to-1, meaning that it takes them 2 hours to finish one finished hour of audiobook. So if the book were 10 hours long, which the average audiobook is, then it would take 20 hours to record it. Now, even the best narrators don't have much better than 6, 7, or maybe 8 hours of stamina in them per day until they just stop performing well. So, I'd say give yourself 6 hours every day. If you're an author, if you're new to this, if you're not a standard narrator, it'll take you closer to 3-to-1. So if it's a 10-hour book, it'll take you 30 hours to read it. So it's going to take a lot of time. Prepare for that. Take breaks every hour or so. That'll really help your energy. And one really important thing is to be good. I know that sounds strange, but what that means is no smoking, no drinking, and no eating cheese. It's because the smoking and drinking just works against the voice, unless you're going for like a really deep, hard-boiled kind of sound. It really works against that. And even if you are going for that sound, you just won't last very long. You'll end up getting hoarse. So really the night before, I would definitely postpone that dinner out. And if you do, make sure to have, a sparkling water perhaps instead of the wine or that martini. The smoking, that's pretty obvious. The cheese, that talks about dairy, right? So dairy makes a lot of phlegm. So I recommend to our narrators and author readers to make sure to avoid cereal with milk that morning. The milk and the coffee usually isn't enough to cause a problem, but as I say that, coffee does tend to kind of dry you out. Try to take it easy on the coffee even. So just to recap, we've decided whether or not you should read the book. And as I said, generally, nonfiction, we love to have the narrator read it. Fiction, it probably won't work out so well unless you're a really good actor, and it does happen. And when you have decided to read it, remember, be passionate. Passion is the most important thing. Commitment. You have to love it and make sure that comes through in your reading. Make sure you have a very quiet, dead environment. So again, no extraneous noises, and dead meaning that not a lot of reverb. So hanging up blankets or something like that if you're not in a purpose-built recording studio. Remember, it's tiring. It's going to take you probably 3-to-1 to read it. So if it's a 10-hour book, it'll probably take you 30 hours. You probably can only really do about 6 hours in a day. So you better block out the week to do it. And it's tiring. Both mentally and physically, it's tiring. So make sure to take those breaks. Every break really, really helps a lot. You don't want to let yourself just keep going and going and going. You'll end up being more efficient by taking more breaks, ironically. Not only it'll sound better, but you'll just have better energy and be able to finish it more quickly. And finally, just be good. No drinking, no smoking, And no eating cheese the night before. We don't want that dairy that gets you very phlegmy. And keep yourself hydrated, right? Lots of water and lip balm to make sure there's no clicks or lip flaps.